Sarah Davis, Director of the Family Enterprise Center at Kennesaw State University, where we help family businesses grow their companies, preserve their legacy, and navigate the unique dynamics of working with family. Today's webinar is part of our ongoing educational programming designed just for family business leaders. I'm thrilled to have Adam Hatcher of 21 Clear with us today to discuss chaos-proofing your family hiring process. Adam knows a thing or two about family businesses. When he joined his family's business, he was able to grow the business to a $500 million company. And while strategy was incredibly important during that time of growth, he also understood the importance of preserving the family. So today, Adam is going to share the framework he uses to help other families avoid chaos during periods of high growth or just on a Tuesday. So Adam, we're so glad to have you here. Please take it away.
Sure. And Sarah, I love how you said that. Chaos long-term or just on a Tuesday. I remember when I started 21 Clear, someone said to me, well, are you helping families with succession? And part of my job in my family company was the head of human resources for 7 years. And I said, well, yes, but if you wait for the event, if you wait for succession in the event, you've missed every single day. Because that's where family businesses, we can do really well on any given day, or we can start that trend toward chaos any given day. We say that. So thank you so much, Sarah. And what a privilege to be a part of Kennesaw State and the Family Enterprise Center. We're going to talk about family hiring today. And Sarah, Stephanie, Carol, I love that this is the topic that y'all chose. But I want to set it in a broader context first. And before we do, I need to let you all know I'm a former trial lawyer before I joined our family's company and then started 21 Clear. I'm not used to making it very far without being interrupted by a judge, jury, or participant. And so Stephanie and Sarah are going to be watching the chat. And please feel free to fire questions live, and I'd love to pick them up and talk them through. We'll also leave time at the end just to sit and talk for a little bit. And so we're going to talk about hiring today, but I want to set it in the context, Sarah, like what you said, of a broader conversation. I learned that when you work with family, there's two things that you want. The first thing is you want to build a great company. And I want to clarify that. I don't mean necessarily a big company. Not all of us become Marriott, Rockefeller. It doesn't have to be large, but a great company, for whatever it means for our families, has the impact we hope for and reaches full value. So a full valuation for the size company that you have in the industry that you're in. All right, so we're talking about the two goals that when you work with family that you as a family have. So the first is to build a great company, and the second is to have a strong family around it. The problem with this is that you don't have to do a Google search very far to realize that the odds are stacked against us ever being able to build a great company with a strong family. I mean, if I give you 1,000 family-owned companies, do we know here? Stephanie, let's play with the chat feature. If I give you 1,000 family-owned companies, how many are ever going to transfer ownership from the first generation to the second? All right. So if you have your chat feature here, see if you can take a guess at a number.
Adam, I'm feeling optimistic that our members will know this statistic.
Oh, I hope so. What do we think? What do we have there? Let's see. Stephanie, we have any guesses?
We have two guesses. We have a 25% and a 15%.
Woo! All right, now hang on. Hold on to both of those numbers. I love them. All right, so if I give you 1,000 family-owned companies, about a third of them will ever transfer from the first generation ownership from the first generation to the second. But hold on to those other two numbers, because of those same 1,000 from the second to the third generation, only 120 are going to make it. And then you can feel what's coming, and the drop off is dramatic. Transferring ownership from the third to the fourth generation of 1,000 is 4. This is part of our problem with ever having the time to build a great company with a strong family around it when you work with family. Because, first of all, the numbers are stacked against us. But then there's a second problem. I'm not going to ask any of us to do this in the chat or with a show of hands, but let's be really honest with each other. There are a lot of reasons why you may want to sell your family company, why you may not transfer ownership. There may be market reasons, family reasons, personal reasons. Not every family owned company is supposed to transfer ownership. But of the ones that do, or the ones that sell, of all of those family companies, how many either sell or transfer at full value? Let's be honest. And how many sell or transfer with a strong family around them without strained and stressed relationships? I asked some of the first family businesses, I asked this question, and there's kind of this silent murmur, and everybody kind of said, it's got to be less than half, right? There's no empirical study of this. And we know when we work together with family, we've got the odds stacked against us. And part of that is because we have taken this audacious challenge of mixing the unconditional with the conditional. When I think about when you say the unconditional nature of family, think about a wedding picture. I think about mine. Like there's a spot in that picture that is forever for my mother. And it doesn't matter what, and my mom and I have a great relationship, but it doesn't matter over our lives what happens in our relationship. That spot will always be unconditionally for my mother. If you took that picture again, if I redid our wedding vows, my wife and I have been married 20 years, some of the attendants might change out. You might have some different people in there, but there's an unconditional spot for your mother. That's the unconditional nature of family. But in addition to the numbers that are against us, when we mix that unconditional nature with the conditional nature of business, we have inherently created tension in the company. And if you're like me and you've worked with your own family, when there are problems inside the family company, people that have never worked with their family will identify them as just that. They'll say, oh, well, there's a problem between the owner and his daughter. But if you've ever been in the middle of it, you know that it feels like chaos. That's why this webinar is titled what it is, because that's the feeling if you're in it. It's not just a problem. And so I got curious. If our goal in working together with family is to build a great company with a strong family around it, why does the opposite happen so much? But then I came to believe that family business chaos is not inevitable, but it's a matter of whether or not we will lean in and do the hard work. And that might sound a little audacious, but over my time in our family's company, I got to sit down with some incredible business minds, and I loved how they approached similarly audacious problems. I sat down with Jim Collins, and I love how Jim believes you can be great by choice. You can go from good to great. Jeff Smart, whose father invented the interview process of top grading, believes that with his process, you can actually almost always hire the right executive. And Pat Lencioni believes that organizational health, if you lean into it, will give you a competitive advantage. And they took these ideas, these big questions, and put them into a framework. And so likewise for a family business, I believe that family business chaos is preventable. But just like with these other authors, it's something we have to work at. And so today, I want to set this idea of chaos-proof family hiring in a context. I want to introduce an idea that you actually don't have a family business. You actually have created a family business inside your for-profit organization. And then, just like those other authors do, I want to introduce a framework to take this huge idea of, okay, I have a family business, how do I chaos-proof it? And break it down into practical steps. And then Sarah and Stephanie and Carol just want us to grab one of them today. How do we chaos-proof hiring? And we're going to go through a few things that you can do today. By the time you get off this webinar, you can, if nothing else on a scratch piece of paper, get closer to chaos proofing your family hiring. And then I'll provide some follow up resources. But if you're logging in and you missed what Sarah said at the top, you may be thinking, who is Adam Hatcher to tell me how to chaos proof our family business? So I am based here in Augusta. I moved back to town as a trial lawyer, practiced law for 3 years, but I spent 13 years after that scaling my family's company, MAU Workforce Solutions, which is 52 years old this year. I held three different roles in legal, corporate strategy, and human resources. And in that time, as Sarah said, we went from a regional to a national company, quadrupled in size, grew the top line by about $40 million in acquisitions, and did it with some pretty incredible clients. So I learned what it meant to run a growing for-profit organization with blue chip customers relying on you. We're a staffing and recruiting business. And so we were the reason that manufacturers could get up to full production and stay there on the manufacturing side. But you may wonder, why does that qualify me for this? To talk to you today? Well, notable for us, I worked across 3 generations in my time there. My father hired me. My grandfather was the CEO at the time. My brother joined a couple of years in, and my cousin and I overlapped as well. I was there for a generational transfer of ownership. And if you want to know my personal credentials, as the General Counsel, I involuntarily committed my CEO grandfather to the ICU. As the as the head of corporate strategy, I took the company my father had purchased and helped him break it down to the ground and restructure it for the future. And as the head of human resources, I set my brother's compensation. And if you've worked in your own family company, I don't think I have to say much more about any of the three of those. And in that, that's what got me thinking, wait a minute, we don't just have a family business. So I want to introduce you. That's who I am to tell you about this. So let me give you 2 concepts here to set up our conversation about chaos proof hiring. So this idea of an inner family business. Think about your company. Think about it like a rectangle here. There's an outer company. It has got competitors, revenue, liabilities. It's got personnel. But if you hire someone tomorrow, if you hire them into a human resources role or an operational role, I mean, that's one thing. But I want you to think of the time that you hired a family member. Or if you were like me and you were a family member hired into the company, think of all the other jobs you had before and being hired into the family business. It was something different. That's that inner family business. To pull an example we're all familiar with, think about Chick-fil-A. What if the Cathys sold Chick-fil-A tomorrow? If they did, all of us would still be able to go to whichever restaurant has taken way too much of our money near our house, and we'd be able to buy our delicious chicken sandwiches tomorrow the same as today. The company, Chick-fil-A, would still be there, but what would be gone? It would be the unique way that the Cathys have built out how they work together, own together, how they run the inner family business together, how they put their culture in, make investments, make charitable donations. That's the part, that inner family business of working together. If you've ever given performance reviews, okay? If you've given, I had a team of 16 when I worked at the family company. I've given performance reviews to a lot of people. To turn around though and have my own father do a performance review is a different experience. There's the company matters, and then there's the family business matters. And why is this important to chaos proofing hiring your family? My dad taught me pretty early that a company is only ever doing one of 2 things. It is either growing or it's shrinking. Companies don't sit flat. If they're sitting flat, that's just a precursor to going down. And likewise, with your inner family business, it is its own entity, the way you work together, own together. And that inner family business is either getting healthier or it is going the opposite. And in fact, slowly moving toward chaos. Jonathan Davis and several other authors wrote in the family business space a book called Generation to Generation, where they explain this. And they said, when you work together with family, and I've got it up here on the screen if you want to read it, go to the second sentence. When families work together, they're working well, they have levels of commitment, long range investment, rapid action, and love for the company that non family businesses yearn for but seldom achieve. Like that's that really when the family business is going well, like when the company is growing. Oh, but wait, there's the other side of the coin. Because when they are working poorly, families can create levels of tension, anger, confusion, despair that can destroy businesses and healthy families amazingly quickly. And this is why I said earlier, family advisors or non-family members who work in companies, when they see family issues inside the company, they call it problems. But we know that it's chaotic. And what is so difficult when you have this inner family business, its own entity that takes its own attention and work, there are executive meetings and then there are family business meetings, just as an example. You are constantly, just like the business, being tested by inflection points. The company's being tested by inflection points like executive exits, client loss, rapid expansion for which you were unprepared. I'm in Augusta. We went through Hurricane Helene and natural disasters. Those things all test your company. But the family business feels all of those and adds another layer. Have inflection points like a family member being unhappy with their compensation, two family members wanting the same job, new family employees joining. All of those moments, just like market conditions test the strategic clarity of an organization, all of those inflection points test the health of the inner family business. And when it's going well, those inflection points, you can both endure them and stay out of a chaos zone. But when you're running closer to the line, when we have ignored the inner family business, when we haven't worked on it in one of those hits, it can drop us down into the chaos zone. And when you're there, it's kind of like a business running without cash. You might be able to make it, but you take one or two hard events when you are running low of cash or you have low family business health, and that's when that chaos sinks in. So, what do we do about that? Because that's my belief that is the reality when we work together with family and we want a great company with a strong family. The audacious challenge we have come up with is that we've got to both run the company really well, but we have to run this inner family business. What does this look like? I've done inner family business work for a couple of decades now. In our family, we went through a couple different iterations. We started with annual meetings, and we would bring in guests, and we would have the CFO or other key operational leaders present. And it took us time to get more sophisticated. And the question I always wanted to know, whether we worked with consultants or board members or just ourselves or looked at a book, is, well, when have I built the first draft of my inner family business? It's not the final, and I'll always have to work on it, but give me a framework. So let me give you a 5-part framework for running your inner family business. First, there's a set of decisions or processes that you need to put in place. You need to be able to hire well. That's what we're going to cover today. But once you hire well, you also need to be able to work together well. And if you have worked with family, you know that working with family members is quite different than anyone else you've ever worked with. And then, in addition to hiring family well and family working together well, how do families run that inner family business together well? And then, while all family businesses have in common that they've hired at least one family member, what I have learned over extensive study is that every single person who has ever worked in their family company has left. And leaving well is just as critical to chaos proofing your family business as hiring with purpose, working together intentionally, running the family business together. But then at the center of that, so each of those areas, those four areas, there's a set of decisions, guardrails, processes that you can choose to put in place to help you be prepared for the inevitable inflection points that are going to hit your family business. But in the middle of that, you can make all the smart decisions that you want. They are held together by the family employees and family owners, and sometimes extended family members, purposefully building trust with each other. So imagine this like a hub and spokes. In the center, in the hub, is the family purposefully building trust in each other's character, competence, and intention toward the business and ownership. And then around that is making key decisions in how you leave, run the family business together, work well. But then today, we're going to touch this idea of how you hire well, or we would say, how do you chaos proof your family hiring? Because the only way you have a family business is if you've hired one. After the founder, once you have a family business, you hire. My grandfather hired my grandmother on the first day that our family's company was started. There wasn't really a process, and I'll spare you the story for today, but that employment lasted one day. And there are lessons in both hiring, leaving, running the family business, working well, and building trust in their single day of working together. But what is interesting to me about hiring well and doing it intentionally, it is the opposite of drifting into your mom and dad's company. I live here in Augusta, and I was on the driving range one day, and there's a guy, we'll call him Victor here on the webinar. But Victor was hitting next to me. We hadn't met, and I asked Victor what he did, and he said, "You mean what did I do?" Well, tell me about it. He said, "Well, my brother Mo and I took 20 years to build a company together." I said, "Oh, well, and how's the company going?" He said, "Well, I don't work there anymore." So I asked him what happened. He said, "Well, my nephew, my brother Mo's son, he wanted to join the company, and I told him that kid didn't know a thing. I told him he didn't work hard, he'd always been lazy, and I wasn't going to have him." So I was interested now. And he said, "Well, we got in an argument. And after a couple of weeks, my brother Mo finally said to me, 'You know what, Victor? If we don't see my son the same way, then we don't see business the same way either.'" And that was the end. They didn't have a way to establish whether or not a family member was qualified to work for the company. And also, to working together well, they didn't have a way to resolve conflict with each other outside of the business. And I tell you all that story because the end of it actually broke my heart. So the brother Victor ends up leaving. Mo hires his son. About a year later, Mo tried to get Victor to come back after firing the son. Victor had moved on with his career. He came back and helped with one customer that was key to him, but never returned. And then Mo, the brother, died, leaving his widow with a company that was not well run, with a family that was strained, and a son who was estranged away from them. When I say it's not a problem, it's chaos, when they say that chaos can get into a family company and rip up a company and a family, that's the stakes when we work together that we're playing with. And that's why focusing on hiring is so important, because every one of us that has a family company has to do this. So let me give you in this family business framework, 4 steps. And we promised at the top, you were actually going to be able to get better at hiring family today. So my encouragement to you, I believe Kathy Milton, who's on here, is around a bunch of other people. Kathy, you may not want to do this on a sheet of paper in front of other people, but if you have a sheet of scratch paper, put it out to the side, because there's going to be a couple opportunities for you to draft ways that you can think about chaos proofing your hiring. Right. So you have 4 things to chaos proof family hiring. The first one is family hiring criteria. Then it's a commitment to match family members to actual jobs. If you have family criteria and you have a family member who is qualified for an actual job in the company, then I'm going to tell you the next step is to say no. Meet the family criteria, pair up with an actual job, but then say no. And if you get over that third point, that third objection, then it is not just drifting into day one. It is actually vigorously onboarding family members in a way that is dissimilar to how you onboard family. All right. So, family hiring criteria. I want to tell you all a personal story. I was at my maternal grandfather's funeral. My paternal grandfather started our family's company, so different one. I was at my maternal grandfather's funeral. We were at the reception after my grandfather's funeral, and one of his friends who'd been in a civic group with him, who was older, talked to me in the line, and I asked him what he did. And he had spent about 35 or 40 years scaling a business with his son. And so I asked him, what's going to happen for your family company next? He told me that he was so proud of his son. Said he went to Georgia Tech and he got an engineering degree, and they were an engineering firm. And said Georgia Tech, and he's worked with me for 25 years, and he's learned all the different functions, and my clients love him, the employees love him, and he's really let me become chairman, and I look forward to turning it over. We hadn't quite worked out the ownership yet, but my son can take over. And I was, again, remember, I'm at my grandfather's funeral, just getting appetizers off of a buffet. And I said, wow, you are so fortunate. That is not the story for so many people. That was a mistake to say, because then he said, oh, well, yeah, it's not all that good because my son wants to hire my grandson, and that kid's an idiot. He said, he doesn't know anything. My son's going to hire him one day, and that boy is going to tear down everything that we have spent 3 decades building. And I took a breath and thought about this idea of family hiring criteria. And I said, well, let me ask you, have you and your son ever sat down and made a list together of if any family member ever wants to join the company, what they would have to do before they were even considered? He said, no. I said, well, let me tell you this. I said, in my experience with family businesses and family owners, I can tell you this. Family owners don't like making lists, and they absolutely don't like being governed by the lists they make. But it's way better to argue about bullet points on a criteria list than it is to talk about the intelligence of a grandson. So what I encouraged him to do is, first, what is family hiring criteria? It is a written list that is for family members before they can be considered for the job, any job. So note, this is not, I was hired into our family's company as the general counsel. This never asked the question, is Adam qualified as an attorney to be the general counsel of the company? It's a prerequisite list. And whatever you put on the list, the 2 most important things in creating it is that first you actually do it, and then you're as specific as you possibly can be. So I want to pull back our curtain and show you the list that our family company had. I want to tell you before I do, though, my father wrote this list when the company was at about $50 million top line and was regional. It was increasing. It was an increasingly complex organization. I joined in 2010, so when he created this, we had not gone through 2008 yet, or we're just in the middle. I'm sorry, we were in the middle of the 2008, 2009 crisis. So he's writing the list in that, but he knows that the company is going to bounce back. And he knows that the demands of the company, the customers that it sells to, were global and publicly traded clients, meaning the sophistication and the demands were going to keep going up. And so This was if the grandfather I had been talking to at my grandfather's funeral made a list, his list and our list weren't going to be the same. So I'm going to show you ours just as an example. So I am in law school. My brother is in college. My sister was in high school. And we all got the same letter from our father. And it said, I don't know if the Lord will ever call you back or you'll ever feel a call to join the family company. But if so, five things have to be true. First, you have to graduate from college. Second, you have to have a degree from graduate school. Not a specific type of graduate school. My brother got an MBA. I went to law school, but you have to have a graduate degree. You have to go work somewhere else. That is not unique in family companies, requiring working somewhere else. However, he added to that, you must get promoted somewhere else. And then lastly, he said, your life needs to be reflective of Christian values. Now, I want you to read into that real quick. What he was doing, the company is a for-profit, privately held company that holds itself out as being faith-based. He wanted to make sure that any family member that joined could work in a company that held itself out as having particular faith principles. And so that list isn't going to be your list. You have a different family, you have a different company, you have different customers. But there are three things. If I broke his list down, it really had three things in it. First, it had education requirements. Second, it had experience requirements. And third, it worked to have an alignment with the culture of the organization. And I want to touch experience and education real quick. And here's something I love about what he did. He told me once, Adam, I graduated from Georgia on a Friday. I went to work at the family company on a Monday. The only person who ever gave me a job was either my father by promotion or the day I bought the company from him. I want you to always know that you have value outside of this organization and outside of my eyes when you come to work here. I also need you to go get experience that we could never get without people who have worked outside and brought it in. And so what he was doing with this list for any family member who joined in an increasingly complex organization, he wanted them to be part of the future of the company with our particular clients, but also always have their own independent identity. Because if you've ever worked with family, you know how difficult that can be. So that's our list, and that's the concept. If you have your side sheet of paper, I want you to try this real quick. Okay, so just a grid, we're going to work over to you. So there's those five criteria I said he put in a letter. Let's assume your family business is XYZ Manufacturing Company. Let's just give a different example. So let's say they sent a similar letter. It might say that before any family member comes to work for XYZ, they need to have an engineering degree. And again, I'm going to encourage you to get specific with your criteria, not just go to college or go to school. Okay, an engineering degree from a U.S. News top 100 university. And then for experience, you've got to work outside the company for 3 years and have become a manager of at least one person. See, that's different than the way my father phrased it for our company. And then lastly, to cultural alignment, when we do a reference check on you, your references need to talk about your humility. Let's assume humility is a big part of the culture of that company, and we don't want you to have an arrest record. You can write this in your family hiring criteria. Okay, so you can see what these criteria do is it communicates to the family their education, experience, and cultural prerequisites. And none of these have anything to do with actual skills and fit to a job. So take just a second and think about your own company. If you have someone in your family who, maybe you have family who are about to graduate from college or in high school. Maybe you have nieces or nephews who may be in kindergarten, but your cousin, your sister-in-law, your aunt, someone has asked you, hey, might they ever have an opportunity to work with you? These questions come up earlier than any of us think. So think, if you had your way, what education would you want to make sure any family member who joined had? And then what experiences outside the organization would you want them to have? And then think through your core values. Pick one, pick two, or just the things, the cultural behaviors your company and its leaders are known for. What's one of those? What's two of those you want to make sure every family member is aligned to? Education, experience, cultural alignment. That's family hiring criteria. That's the first step in chaos proofing family hiring. And now I want to celebrate you. Okay. If you took a minute, Kathy Milton, if you, no matter where you are, Kathy logged in first, so I just picked on her a couple times. If you just did this, I want to celebrate you because here's what's so hard about a family business, right? So I know running an organization day in and day out is hard. It's hard to do strategic planning. It's hard to make the time. It's hard to have the discipline. If it's hard enough to argue with customers. It's certainly hard to argue with each other about value propositions. But this is even harder. This is doing inter-family business work, and the family business has no revenue. It has no customers, but it sits right in the heart of the organization. And if it's healthy, it can help the organization reach full value with a strong family. And if it's not, all of it can go away spectacularly. And so what you just did, maybe for the first time, well, not really, because this is the Kennesaw State Family Enterprise Center, but maybe for today, maybe the first time today, you've thought about that inter-family business and taken a step at making it healthy. So congratulations to you. All right, that's step one. Now let's go to step two of chaos proofing family hiring or hiring family members well. And that is once they pass the family hiring criteria, you need to match them to an actual job. And let me just go ahead and say up front that director of this economy is scary is not an actual job. Director of I don't want to go find something else is not an actual job. And while those are funny examples, I can also tell you about a family business that hired their son into a sales role. But they brought in outside investment and had limited ability to affect the compensation plan in their own organization. But they wanted their son to make significantly more than other employees. And so what they did in the sales role was they made him where everyone else had a territory, he did not. Where everyone else had a restriction on how they sold, particularly not taking clients from others, he did not. And his position allowed him to take business from other salespeople to be able to make more money. It's sometimes director of this economy is scary is funny. It is dangerous, in fact, to the organization to let family members join the company when they do not have an actual job. And you know your job is real if the job has a name that I could look up in a salary software. I spent 7 years as the head of human resources in our company. I know like there are jobs that are in salary softwares and there are jobs that are not. So the first thing, your family member needs a job that's in there. Second, they need to actually have results that they are responsible for. I worked with a phenomenal marketing team in our family's company, but I don't know why so many family businesses like to hire family members into part or full-time marketing roles with no descript job other than to make fun and snark other people and pay them $80,000 a year. I don't know why it's marketing. I don't know why that's the number. But if it's a real job, you can name the job and the job has actual results. And then lastly, you know it's real if you can imagine telling the family member why they're going to be good at the role, selling them on it. I saw a great example of this a few years ago. A second generation CEO in a manufacturing company. His son was about to graduate from Clemson University. So my apology to our Georgia Tech and Georgia graduates on this, but it was a good story out of Clemson. Second generation, he had bought his parents out and his son was about to graduate from Clemson. They were growing the company and their competitive difference was the quality of their product. And they had to increase first pass yield as they were scaling the company. So what the CEO wanted to do, the second generation CEO, he wanted to hire entry-level engineers to put around his more senior engineers. that had particular focus on quality and could run particularly quality improvement projects to increase first pass yield. That's what he wanted to do as part of selling it. And his son had both been successful at Clemson, had worked an internship in a quality department during his college years. And when he applied to the family company, they were able to hire him into an entry level engineering role with a quality focus and give him his part of this target of increasing the first pass yield and the quality of the company and thus making it successful. It was a job so tailored to what he was good at that his father could tell him exactly why he was going to be successful. And that's a very normal practice in human resources, to have a tight job and a tight fit and sell them. And just for some reason in family companies, there's this temptation where we can just let someone drift in. But when you do this, when you have clear family criteria and you match people only to actual jobs so clear you could sell them on why you think they'll be successful in it, you have set the family members and the company up for success. Otherwise, you have left them to blow in the wind, and maybe it'll work, it won't. And when it doesn't work for a family member, that is that unnecessary chaos we're trying to avoid. So steps 1 and 2, family criteria, actual job. But if both of those are true for a family employee that you're considering hiring, or if you're a family member considering joining the family business, the next thing I would tell you to do is to say no to the opportunity. Why would I say that? There was a good article in the Wall Street Journal this was back in April. Rachel Wolf's a writer for them. She has an interest in family companies. And she wrote an article, you can see it here, about people coming out in a scary economy and wanting to go work for their parents instead. And so I have a podcast and a newsletter, and somebody that was a subscriber to one of them asked me, if you got to talk to one of these folks, what would you tell them? What is the first piece of advice you would give a young family member considering joining their family company? And I said it would be simple. If they had family hiring criteria that they had met, there's an actual job, I would tell them, don't do it. Do not work together. Go work somewhere else. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea, but it's the exact opposite of drifting into the company because everything else is scary. So why not? Why would I tell your family members to not join the company? Well, first, there's a risk. I remember my father telling me as we reflected back on years together, he said, I knew when I hired you the risk I was taking. Because as we talked about earlier in the webinar, every family member you hire, you're adding more unconditional family into a conditional environment, creating more and changing tension that's going to move and evolve with you over time in the life cycle of the family business. So you are constantly taking a risk. And the other thing you're doing when you hire family, or when you let them work for you or you go work, is you're asking your family or giving them permission to form a fully integrated view of your character. They might know you as the funny uncle. They might know you as the ballerina. They might know you as the kind grandfather. But when you invite them to work with you or you go work with them, you're opening them yourself up to a complete evaluation of your character. And that is a risk that you're taking, that you actually don't know when you go work with family or they work with you what you're going to see. You don't know until you work together if your aunt's a poor decision maker. You don't know if you have family members as wonderful, as generous of gift givers as they may be at Christmas. When you work with them, do they actually put their interests above the family's? Or do they put the family above the customers and the company versus always putting customers and company first and then family and themselves? You don't know that till you work together. I had one view of my grandfather when he and I worked together. And when I worked in the family company, I realized he had a very different and a tough management style. I would have never known that unless we work together. And he likely learned a couple of things about me in the few years that we worked together too. Anywhere else you could work in the world other than your own family's company, you don't take these risks of inviting your family to create a fully integrated view of your character. And so, because of that risk and because of that tension, when you work in a family company, you create this family business or you make it bigger by being another family member that joins. There is a requirement of you to work and run the family business in addition to the company. I had about 15 different jobs for free pay or credit before I came to work in our own family's company. And they were complex, they were challenging, but none of them required me every day to run two different organizations, a family business and an outer company. But when you join the family business, that's what you're signing up for. So I would tell someone, even if you meet the criteria and have an actual job, the next thing is don't do it. Don't drift into this because there are big risks and unknowns you're taking on and requirements you're accepting. But if eyes wide open, you see that, you know that, and you're willing to take it on, the last step in chaos proofing your family hiring is to vigorously onboard new family members. Let's juxtapose that word vigorous. There is a temptation when you onboard to believe that family members, they were around you growing up. They probably picked it up by osmosis. I talked to a second generation family executive, and the next generation was with them, sons, nieces, nephews, and they used that word with me. They said, well, I mean, Adam, they understand by osmosis. I'm like, well, just because they came to Thanksgiving, it doesn't mean you know how to handle particular client relationships. And just because you remember to text everybody on their birthday doesn't mean you know how to do a performance review. I mean, it's lunchtime, so I'm allowed to do this. Just because you know the family lasagna recipe doesn't mean someone knows how to complete a budget shell or that they can recite a core value, and nor are they expected to just because they know the recipe. But once you're hired, that's the responsibility that you take on. And so what are components when we say vigorous onboarding? I think of that with three components. First, it's a written plan. Second, if you are able to, you provide them a broader view of the organization through job rotation. And third, you introduce them to the family employees uniquely. So first, to a written plan. When I joined the company, very different. Purposeful onboarding is not done walking down the hallway in passing conversations. In our company, we had a multi-page, multi-month onboarding for staff and a similar multi-page, multi-month onboarding for leaders. Two separate onboarding checklists. I joined as a general counsel, as an individual contributor. So can you guess what written plan my father gave me? Yeah, some of you, I know it. He gave me both. I was going to do everything up front. And whatever your list is, if you are about to hire a family member, if you're about to join, write down the onboarding plan. Work with human resources, work with a consultant. Talk with me afterwards. I'm happy to tell you how we broke down because I had to go through different departments and functions. We're a staffing and recruiting company. I had to do 10 drug screens and sit for a half day with the receptionist and then go work on a client and a prospect proposal with finance. You want them to go through a written list to introduce them to the organization. Assume they hadn't worked there. I had actually worked there in high school, in entry-level receptionist functions. None of that prepared me for joining as a leader in a high pressure role like general counsel. So write down the plan. Second, if you can, and this is not something I did, but something some of the best, and we did this with my brother, and something some of the best family businesses I've seen, as best you can, provide them a job rotation. If you can put them through, if your organization is of a size to put them through operations, finance, sales, human resources, I mean, that's just an example, over a year. Great. I saw very large family organization who one of their now family executives started in a franchise, and then they went into franchise selection, and then they went into one corporate function, and then they moved into another corporate function. And they had the luxury of a larger organization where they could move. But even if you can give someone the time to shadow roles for weeks or months at a time to get their hands in and learn before they have their own job responsibilities, it will help them understand the organization. It also gives them the message, family to family, I didn't expect you to know all this. I remember one of the hard things joining your family company, I spent about 6 months trying to pretend like I knew everything. I felt like I was working in a fishbowl and I wanted everybody to understand, think that I understood it all. And finally, someone so kindly pulled me aside and said, Adam, it's okay to ask questions. We know you don't know anything. And so when you create an onboarding plan and job rotation, and part of it, you're taking care of if you've joined your family company or if you're about to, there is an anxiousness. This helps to take care of that. And then lastly, introduce them to the other family employees. When I joined, my grandfather, my father, and my cousin were there, and eventually my brother would join. And when we onboarded new leaders to teams, we could have taken that idea and done it just for the family. And that would look like a morning where we sat down and each of us went around the table and talked about, well, what is Adam's job? What's Bill's job? What's Randy's job? We would go around and talk about our jobs. We used work personality profiles. You might use the Myers-Briggs, Working Genius, Strength Builders, whatever it may be. You would go through that and say, this is my personality. This is their personality. When we interact with each other at work, how do our personalities mesh or not? Actually, a couple years into working together, my father and I realized that we use the predictive index. The predictive index, there was a part of our personalities that was inherently at conflict. And we didn't know that for a couple of years. But when we finally looked at it and we'd worked together a while, we realized it. And then it was something that I could be aware of in our working relationship. So on board to the jobs, the personality profiles, you can even get vulnerable and share what you're strong and what you're weak at. The new family member, what are their goals going to be? How do they interact? How might they interact with other family members? Again, it's not long. It's just probably a morning, but you sit down and what you're acknowledging is that we have an inner family business, those of us who have chosen to work here. So we're going to introduce each other to ourselves as family employees. It also may be the first time that you call each other by your first names. In onboarding a family employee or being onboarded, I would encourage you, if you've always called your grandfather Poppy, like I called mine, or your dad Daddy, or your sister, whatever your family nicknames are, as you are onboarded to the company, let it go. I called my father Randy. I called my brother Baker whenever we were doing family things. And it's just a small way to help you realize that you're not at Thanksgiving. You're not watching SEC football together. You are in a family business inside a company that's relying on you. And then thankfully, when you are watching football together, you can flip right back to dad or buddy or whatever you use. So onboarding to family employees also lets you start to professionalize your relationship. And that is our framework for hiring well, having family hiring criteria, matching to actual jobs, not drifting into it, saying no. And then even if we get over that, being vigorously onboarded. You may have sat through this though and want to put this off. Okay, maybe your in-laws, your cousins, your nieces, whatever, they're young. But remember, in my experience, you can never start soon enough on purposefully hiring family. The need for this kind of clarity will be on you before you know it. Um, my sister was in high school when she got the letter from my dad, and kindergartners, you may have had this experience, kindergartners can create awkward moments by saying things like, well, mommy, will I ever be able to work with grandpa too? Having those answers earlier will help you chaos proof your family business. And so I have found when you work on these, you may say, where do you work on them? And so as we close together, I'll tell you, we used family meetings. We may call them ad hoc, but we sometimes did them annual, did them quarterly. It depends on the rhythm of the family. Sometimes things were emailed, sometimes there were other resources there. We use family business meetings to work out a lot of these things. That's why, in part, I founded 21 Clear. My dream is to end family business chaos so that you can build a great company with a strong family around it. And we do that two ways with dedicated family business consulting processes that have a strategic, talent, legal mind, because that's what I come from, and a for profit perspective. Because ultimately, the family business only exists because there's a company, and then we've got a couple of resources, Sarah. These should only be used alongside Kennesaw State's webinars, panel discussions, live workshops, and newsletter. But, I started a monthly newsletter that we can help you get subscribed to. And actually, yesterday, I just put out the fourth episode of the podcast. Those each come out a month. And what they're meant to do is whether you touch them for 3 minutes or 25 minutes, every time you touch one of these, I want you just to have that rare moment, just like Sarah, Stephanie, Carol, when people touch Kennesaw State's Family Enterprise Center, you have that rare moment to think about the inner family business because it takes work, just like on the company, to keep chaos out. Sarah, I am really grateful to y'all for partnering with me. And this topic, y'all, as a personal kind of close with us, I want to tell you, I was sitting there last night thinking about today, and it choked me up a bit because I told you I worked together for my grandfather for 3 years. And I asked him once, and in this conversation, I called him Poppy. I said, Poppy, what let you build this company? And he said, Adam, it was two things. He said, it was my ability to put the right person in the right job and to use personality assessments wisely, like the predictive index, to do that. And as I looked at these slides last night, I realized that this webinar of us together is just the very extension to the family business of the thing he did. And we're carrying on a family legacy even in this. So, as he would have said to you, thank you so very, very much for joining. And Sarah, we've got a couple of minutes left. I can hang out.
Great. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. In the interim, I would love to talk a little bit about your upcoming book, Adam. So I'm going to make a plug for it. I know that you're not going to, but I've had the privilege of reading some excerpts from his upcoming book on chaos proofing. And when could the rest of the audience expect to maybe be able to read a copy of this book?
I started writing down everything I knew about a family business or that I'd learned from others. And it turned into an 800-line Google outline. I did not want to write a book, but as a lawyer, I started to organize them and it snapped in. And so in the first half of next year, hopefully in Q1, I'll be publishing a book that covers this family business framework. What you saw earlier in the webinar is actually the organization of it. Ahead of time, though, the newsletter, Sarah, that we put out and the podcast, each one of them, like this webinar, tries to grab a piece of that and introduce it. So we're going to be introducing the concepts. My hope is someone can today wrote down family hiring criteria and maybe they got somebody they need to talk to right now. But yeah, and then we'll publish at the beginning of next year.
Incredible. And I've read quite a few books on family businesses, as most of you know, and I feel like what I've read from Adam's really fills a void. So I think you all will enjoy it, and hopefully it'll be one of the ones sitting out at an upcoming workshop that you all have the opportunity to grab. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so I'll just go ahead and wrap us up. So thank you all so very much for joining. Programs like this are one of the many ways that we support family businesses through the Family Enterprise Center. So if you're not yet a member, we'd love to have you as part of our community because you belong here. So thank you, Adam, and thank you everyone for attending. You all have a great day.